There is a specific moment when the life plan suddenly halts. You look at the job, the relationship, or the goals you've chased for years, and instead of motivation, you feel an overwhelming, flat emptiness. The old strategies fail. Your morning routines, the productivity hacks, the sheer force of habit, they stop working. They just echo in an exhausting void. Culture typically views this vacuum as a defect. We are conditioned to diagnose the exhaustion as a failure of willpower or a medical breakdown, usually prescribing a fix of forced positivity or increased productivity. But approaching this state as a problem to be solved only creates more resistance. By desperately scrambling back to normal, you miss the specific psychological purpose of this pain. What if returning to normal is the exact outcome your mind is actively fighting to prevent? To understand this, we examine the persona. This survival-based mask, the specific roles we adopt to succeed, serves us for decades, securing career and social standing. But the self grows beneath it, hardening this once useful garment into a rigid cage. Your agonizing burnout signals the structural buckling of that persona, giving way under the immense pressure of your internal expansion. This structural collapse marks the moment your internal growth finally exceeds the capacity of the identity you outgrew. When those surface cracks give way, the psyche drops into a much deeper, more disorienting space. This territory is historically mapped as the dark night of the soul. Neurologically, during existential crises, the brain's default mode network, responsible for self-referential thinking, destabilizes. When these predictive pathways are disrupted, meaning-making systems go offline. Reasons for getting out of bed or valuing goals collapse entirely, leaving a cognitive void. Long before we had neuroimaging, the pioneering psychiatrist Carl Jung diagnosed this exact state of systemic collapse in his patients. Jung observed that dodging this painful developmental process only creates chronic anxiety. He concluded that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. The psyche intentionally forces us into this fire of meaninglessness. It strips away our comforting illusions to burn off the false, survival-based self. For some, the floor drops out entirely, pulling them into the absolute bottom of the descent, a phase clinical literature calls the dark night of the self. This stage abandons the question of purpose entirely. It is the terrifying sensation that your personal history, your internal continuity, is dissolving into nothing. Psychologists describe this profound disruption of self-concept as ego dissolution or ego death. Yet this dissolution is a structural requirement. By dismantling the rigid ego, the mind executes a total psychological clearing and resetting. The total absence of your old self is excruciating to endure. But that exact void is the required space for a more authentic, integrated self to emerge. Surviving this void requires dropping our instinct to fight it. The most effective mechanism for navigating the darkness is radical self-compassion. Instead of panicking or treating your disorientation as a disease to be eradicated, you practice treating yourself with the patience you would offer a close friend. You deliberately just sit with the discomfort. The objective isn't to aggressively slay the dragon of darkness. The task is to sit patiently in the fire until it transforms you. When you finally stop struggling and surrender to the dissolution of the ego, the psyche begins its most important work. This rebirth process is known as individuation. It is the natural unfolding where a person moves beyond inherited roles, integrating their hidden shadow and conscious traits into a single cohesive self. Clinical research on post-traumatic growth shows the exact results of this integration. People who process these crises effectively emerge with enhanced psychological flexibility, deep authenticity, and a new operating system that functions free from the need for external validation. Surviving this descent does not return you to your previous baseline. It rebuilds you into a more robust, integrated human being. As the ego's heavy investment in its own private story dissolves, the wall between the me and the world begins to thin. you start to realize that the emptiness you've been carrying is actually a resonance with the shared suffering of the world. Abraham Lincoln endured a life steeped in death, isolation, and severe melancholy. This suffering forged the wisdom that guided a nation through war. Nelson Mandela survived 27 years of brutal imprisonment, using total isolation to develop immense compassion and a quiet, unshakable control. Maya Angelou carried the deep trauma of childhood abuse, losing her voice for years, only to reclaim it and inspire millions, proving that the darkness and the vision flow together. This shift from a private struggle to a shared experience transforms the darkness into a sharp, compassionate focus. When the personal ego no longer occupies the center of the frame, you finally have the energy to serve the whole. The dark night executes a necessary, beautiful clearance of the person you were told to be, leaving room for the person you actually are. We start building our psychological shell in childhood. It is a necessary survival strategy, designed to secure love and fit into the specific structures of our family and our culture. Carl Jung named this the persona. It functions as the automatic interface between you and the world. For decades, this mask helps us hit career milestones and perform our social roles with remarkable efficiency. The cost of this success is often a quiet, internal severance. To keep the persona running, we slowly stop listening to our authentic wants, burying them beneath the requirements of the mask. By the time we reach midlife, we have often become experts at surviving, yet we find ourselves trapped in an identity that has no room for actual living. Then, a glitch occurs. Even when your life looks objectively successful, a total sense of emptiness hits without warning. The motivation that powered you for 20 years suddenly vanishes. Modern society usually labels this as a clinical failure or a mental breakdown. We are encouraged to see it as a malfunction of our biology that needs to be corrected. Spiritual traditions offer a different map for this crisis, calling it the dark night of the soul. This is an ancient initiation, a sign that the psyche has outgrown its current container. The devastating loss of meaning is a structural collapse. The mask is falling away because it can no longer carry the weight of the person underneath. This collapse has a specific signature in the brain. Neuroscientists view the human brain as a prediction machine. It uses our established identity to generate expectations and maintain internal coherence. It predicts how we should feel and act based on the framework of our old mask. This internal narrative is held by the default mode network, a specific set of brain regions responsible for maintaining our ego and our autobiographical history. When the societal mask fails to align with our internal reality, this network destabilizes, the connections snap, the brain is forced to shut down its outdated operating framework. We experience this neural reorganization as a physical loss of ground. It is a total disorientation where our meaning-making systems have gone offline. This void is an adaptive response. The brain is clearing away an obsolete architecture to make room for the cognitive flexibility required for the next stage of development. Carl Jung argued that this internal dismantling is a prerequisite for psychological health. He named this process individuation. It is a period where the ego must structurally die so that a whole, undivided self can finally emerge. When we try to avoid or medicate this phase, we risk staying trapped in a one-sided life. We keep performing a role that no longer has any spirit behind it. Many of history's most influential leaders were forged in this specific darkness. Abraham Lincoln's leadership grew directly from a melancholic breakdown that forced him to confront the foundations of his own character. Nelson Mandela's decades of imprisonment served as a physical mirror for this dark night. His suffering was the soil that allowed an impenetrable presence and wisdom to take root. The agony of the void is an evolutionary toll. It is the cost of waking up from the autopilot of the persona. Surviving the void requires you to stop trying to rebuild the old mask. You have to abandon the demand for external productivity. The psyche needs non-instrumental space to reorganize itself. Turning toward nature or a creative practice gives the internal life a safe container to rewiring its connections. Engaging with the texture of clay or the silence of a forest allows the authentic self to surface. It bypasses the ego's need for achievement and focuses entirely on the present moment. True healing begins when you let your inner life exist for its own sake, stripping away the illusion that your human worth is tied to your economic output. Meaning eventually returns, but only when the illusion of the isolated, ego-driven self has vanished. Eckhart Tolle describes this as a shift toward non-conceptual connectedness, a state where you feel aligned with reality without needing to interpret it. Clinical research on post-crisis growth indicates that as the rigidity of the ego fades, empathy and social sensitivity naturally increase. We stop looking for validation and start looking for connection. Thomas More explains that our personal darkness often converts into a compassionate vision for the world. We realize that our struggle is fundamentally linked to the struggle of everyone else. The dark night burns away the mask. What remains is the awakened, authentic self, finally ready to participate in the world as it truly is.